This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today I'm speaking with John Sommers-Flanagan, Director of the Center for Advancement of Positive Education at the Phyllis J. Washington College of Education. John is transitioning to this role after a long tenure as Professor of Counseling here at the University of Montana.
And so where do you find trust? Where do you see people being trustworthy? And I think we shouldn't just let that go. I think we need to let people know, if we see their trustworthiness, that we're grateful for it.
I asked John to join me for a conversation about good faith, and we got into that topic and a whole lot more. John, thanks for joining me.
Justin, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us, where did you grow up and what did your parents do?
I grew up in Vancouver, Washington, Vancouver,
Nice.
USA.
Yes.
And my my dad was a full-time, self-employed city shade man, meaning
City
that
Shade, man.
that
What
was-
is that?
that's the name of his company, City Shade.
Oh,
And he did shades and awnings and blinds and patio covers, spent a lot of time going up and down ladders.
yeah.
My mother worked alongside him in the business.
Okay.
She made the shades, and she was a full-time parent for a number of years when we were little.
Nice. How did you make your way into academia?
That is a great question. I'm a first-generation college student,
Wow.
and I went to a community college because I really just wanted to do sports. And then I played football and baseball at a
Wow.
community college just outside Portland, Mount Hood Community College. Great experience.
Yeah.
And then I went to Oregon State, got a bachelor's degree in psychology. And then I turned out I liked psychology, and I got some good feedback about I was a pretty good counselor. And so I decided to go to grad school after about a year and a half working at a psychiatric hospital. Went to grad school, and I suddenly went from being kind of shy to really loving teaching. I taught my first course at the University of Montana in 1982, Intro Psych.
Wow. And so as a longtime professor here, you both were educating future generations of counselors, but also in clinical practice yourself, right?
Yes, mostly clinical practice before I became full-time
Okay.
tenure track here.
Okay.
And then some part-time practice since having been a professor here.
And we should mention you are the newly named director of a newly named center here at the University of Montana. Tell us about that.
I am. Super exciting. The Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation gave us a gift of $9.4 million. Half of the money goes to scholars or scholarships in education and school counseling. The other half of the money starts this center that we have called the Center for the Advancement of Positive Education.
And what is positive education?
Positive education is the application of positive psychology. And positive psychology is really, psychology has spent so many years focusing on what is wrong with you.
Yeah.
We're really good at that. We have all kinds of diagnoses, and I got a chance to study psychology in such depth in the 1980s. It was fantastic and fascinating, and I loved being able to diagnose people as well as myself.
Yeah.
But in the last 5 or 10 years, I have just shifted more toward positive psychology, which is the systematic focus and study on strengths,
Okay.
on what brings people joy, what brings people happiness, what kinds of resources do people have intrinsic within them that they can grow
Right.
to deal with their problems. Instead of focusing on the problems, we focus on the resources, the strengths, the skills, the virtues, grow those so that then people can deal with their problems using their strengths.
John, I asked you to join me today to talk about good faith. It's a topic I've been thinking a lot about lately. I'm concerned about the low levels of good faith in our society, and thinking in my classes and in my interaction with students and others, like, how can we train it? So let's start with just good faith. What does that concept mean to you?
Well, I think it's one of those things that's hard to define, but it has, I think, to do with honest intent, right? With honest activities, honest dealing with people. And it's hard to judge, right? It's hard to judge because I think honesty is a difficult thing to discern whether
Right.
someone's being perfectly honest with you or not.
Right. What's known about trust? Are humans adapted to trust, or are we adapted to be skeptical? Are there some default settings? How much is default setting and how much is individual difference, or varies by situation?
Yeah, there's a really interesting book that Malcolm Gladwell wrote, and he wrote a lot about how we have this default system in our brains to actually believe people,
Yeah.
to believe that they're telling the truth until and unless there's a series of mistruths or deception that happens. And so I do think we have a default trust mechanism that happens in interpersonal relationships. But I think once it's been betrayed, then I think what happens psychologically is we start to look for signs of dishonesty and signs of betrayal, and that can kind of catch fire.
Yeah, this is sounding similar to psychology versus positive psychology in some ways. Why is good faith important?
We're in a relational society. We're relational beings, right? And I think we need to be able to trust one another. And when it doesn't happen, the sense of betrayal is something that is bad for the individual, it's bad for the relationship, and it's bad for the community, because I think a lot of negativity just ends up spilling out all over the place.
How do you build trust in people you're advising, either students or patients in your clinical practice?
I really think it has to do with a history of trustworthiness, honesty, I think to some extent vulnerability, to be honest and open about things that show that you're being honest and open. Like if I were to make a mistake, if I were to miss an appointment, for me to not cover for that, but instead to let the advisee or whoever it is that I'm interacting with to really give a direct and responsible apology for that instead of trying to cover it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of this cycle of injury and repair as central to building trust.
Yes.
And I think of my relationship with my kids, there's plenty of injury, but we also built a nice system of repair. Sometimes it happens in the moment, sometimes it takes a little bit more time, but that cycle of injury and repair seems to build some sort of tissue that's critical to trust. I think it's just important to apologize, and my daughter in particular is good at calling me out on the conditional apology or the apology with a but. And I've just learned over time, and I observe this in myself, and I give her the same advice, like, you might feel the but part, don't say it.
Nice. Yeah, that's really nice. A clear demonstration of affection, reconnection.
Yeah. And it seems like with both of them, I try to do it immediately if I'm capable of it. And, for sometimes it takes a little bit more time with them, but it happens. It's a nice cycle. And I think we've learned that there's a range of how we can treat each other. It allows a form of humanity, and it allows us to avoid toxic positivity in a way that we keep it real, but there is a form of repair that we do a good, nice job of coming back to.
Yeah, and as somebody who was the director of a parenting education organization for 8 years, I love what you're saying, because at the very least, what a fabulous way to model how to do an apology. And there's a famous old psychiatrist named Alfred Adler who used to talk about the courage to be imperfect, and that we are imperfect.
Yeah.
Of course we'll make mistakes, and to take responsibility for it and to apologize directly, really cool.
Yeah, thanks. And I didn't have good role models for that. And I would say in my marriage, I was not good at that. And the experience of ending a marriage and moving into this new life and the patterns I wanted to establish with the kids, it just seemed like, one, the notion of perfection was pierced. So, yeah, it was liberating in a way. And I do think that I look at my closest personal relationships, and there is that cycle and there is that trust. So then how do we generalize from those personal relationships to our institutional relationships? Because I feel like we're living in a moment with some of the lowest levels of institutional trust since it's been tracked. and institutional accountability and all these things. People are losing faith in the institutions around us that are critical to holding our society together.
No, and I think we are at all-time lows or near all-time lows in terms of public trust of government, of the mainstream media, of other large corporations or institutions.
And near all-time lows in trust in our neighbors, too. So there is some individual relationship dynamics to this, too.
And I'll just say this, I won't belabor it, but we do have a president who is a fire hose of lies and misinformation. And I think that characterizes, or it leads people toward distrust and bad faith. We have a similar thing that happens on social media, right? Social media, what is it true? Is it a deep fake?
Gosh.
Or is it a shallow fake? Some of it just a subjective dishonesty, some of it's systemic and intentional. I'm a mental health professional, and I'm aware of the fact that young kids go on TikTok, and they learn their diagnoses there. And there has been some research on the inaccuracy of the information on TikTok. I've supervised cases where a kid is telling the counselor, I'm pretty sure I have dissociative identity disorder because I heard it on TikTok.
And then if you think about how TikTok works, they would just want to keep you on the platform.
Yes.
So the algorithm's going to figure out that, if I keep serving this guy content that is associated with the ailment that they think they are suffering from, it's going to keep them on the platform, and they're going to keep coming back for more.
Yep.
So you got to think about like how these things are designed, and that layers on top of the content that's put on the platforms themselves.
Yeah. And so one of the things I'm really good at, Justin, is to identify bad faith out there. And I think I've become better and better at that, not really even consciously, not because I've studied how to identify it, but because of a thing that is called confirmation bias.
Okay.
And confirmation bias being that we tend to notice what we believe and find evidence to support our pre-existing ideas and beliefs. And so I now have adopted this mentality that there's a lot of bad faith out there. And so then I tend to see it all the time. And this kind of just brings me back to your example as a parent. And I just heard you saying you had a lot of intentionality in terms of you had the perfection pierced, and then you decided, I didn't have apologies role modeled to me, but it's like, I am going to do them. And so you started to initiate that. And that takes a really, I think, strong and committed cognitive or mental shift to say, I'm going to do this differently. And so for me, and I think for a lot of people who consume media, we really probably have to get out of that sort of cognitive bias that everything is a lie and start to at least notice the times when the media or politicians are really trying to be straight shooters and serve our interests and be good faith actors.
I love that framing, and it's consistent with positive psychology. Like, how do we find good faith? We'll be back to my conversation with John Sommers-Flanagan after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com.
This is Anne Helen Peterson, and I am a senior culture writer at BuzzFeed News, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm speaking with John Sommers-Flanagan about good faith. So what are some of your rules or recommendations for for discerning and paying attention and picking up on, okay, there's a moment where somebody's acting in good faith. I want to listen to that.
Yeah, for me, self-awareness goes a long ways.
Okay.
My wife, Rita, sometimes assists me with my self-awareness.
I like how you put that.
Right. Well, and it is helpful because she will notice the things that I'm noticing and reflect it back to me. And then I could say, oh, wait a minute, I am getting a little too preoccupied with this one way of viewing things. And it's a little bit addictive because I think there's something really gratifying about searching for that which annoys us.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's so easy to find.
Yeah, it is seductive.
Ooh. And then it has this like reinforcement schedule that's built into it. And so I think step one, awareness, right? To be able to say, oh yeah, I think I'm over searching for those things that annoy me. I'm over searching for the violations of the public trust. I'm looking for those everywhere. And of course, I'm finding them.
Yeah, absolutely. Enragement is the pathway to engagement, and that's how media works now.
Yeah.
So there's a profit motive behind exploiting this tendency.
Absolutely. And I think for all of us to recognize that pattern and to try to step back from it, even though it's gratifying to feel enraged and to engage that way, I also think, gosh, there was somebody who was on PBS maybe 3 weeks ago, and he said something in a way that I absolutely loved. He was an academic, so I immediately looked him up online and I sent him, thank you so much. And that helps me to disrupt my pattern of negative perceptions of what's happening in the media, and then to actually do something and compliment someone for doing something well and saying something clearly and honestly.
So it flips you into a positive mindset and one where you're seeking avenues to build trust.
Yeah.
At least that's what I'm hearing.
And so where do you find trust? Where do you see people being trustworthy? And I think we shouldn't just let that go. I think we need to let people know if we see their trustworthiness that we're grateful for it.
So let's try and exercise in good faith here. I mean, you and I are academics. I've been affiliated with the University of Montana for a long time. I think we both share a deep love and affinity for this institution. Higher education as a broad institution it has some of its lowest levels of trust since it's been charted. Vast swaths of the population are losing faith that our institutions are adequately preparing people for the world as it is.
Right.
How do you think about trust in higher education, trust in an institution like ours? And even if you don't agree with some of the critiques, how do you approach your role in being a part of rebuilding trust?
Yeah, I think I probably do agree with some of the critiques. I don't think I agree to the depth that it has been discussed in the media. There are some disappointing things that happen in academia. As you know, the system can be really frustrating.
Yeah, and slow.
And so slow. That said, I still, for myself personally, and for many of the graduate students who I've had contact with and the undergraduates I've had contact with, education is transformative, right? It has this potential to transform and open our minds to things that we were never aware of. I didn't even know what a college professor did.
Right.
To have now, to be one, it is a stunning transformation for me. And again, I know there are problems with it. There's problems with the way we deliver education. There are problems with the way that students are built to now really have this kind of consumer mentality where they really want to be, I think the word that has been used in the literature is coddled a little bit in their educational needs. I think those are problems, but I don't think they're insurmountable.
Yeah. And even just as you framed your response, to me, that is an act of good faith, to be in a role, to love the work you do, yet acknowledge the problems. The inability to acknowledge that problems exist are a way of eroding good faith or evidence of bad faith.
Yeah.
This is a problem that exists on both sides of the aisles to varying degrees, right? When a politician says something and does the other thing, people just roll their eyes and move on at this point.
Right.
We don't expect good faith acting out of our politicians. Yet it occurs to me that the big problems we have as a society are going to require good faith bargaining between people that are operating in trust.
Yes.
How do we break this stalemate?
Yeah. Well, I think the word you used, expect, right? We don't even expect good faith interactions anymore. I mean, that's a deep cognitive or mental set. I do think that people used to take responsibility, right? I mean, Harry Truman, the buck stops here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really, as a citizenry, we need to really require that of our elected officials, of people who are running for office, and that we really need to say, you're more likely to get elected if you're honest with us about identifying the problems, some of which happened under your watch, and that you talk to us directly about how you're trying to address them, a little bit like you might do with your kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, an apology or an acknowledgement of a problem also, I think, should be accompanied by a commitment or at least an interest in making a change.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think as a populace, as a citizenry, we need to really say, okay, one of our expectations for politicians is that they actually take responsibility for their mistakes and develop a plan for addressing them.
So I think we agree that some degree of bad faith exists on all sides of the political spectrum. And then there's different versions of trust. So you mentioned President Trump and that lies and misinformation. Yet at the same time, with many core issues that President Trump talks about and has appeal, there is a kernel of truth. And I think that kernel of truth allows him to build a certain type of trust. And we don't necessarily trust him to tell the truth on a daily basis, but we trust that he kind of gets the broad stroke that there's a problem. Yet on the other side, Democrats have eroded good faith by not acknowledging problems. Could be issues of trade, could be issues of immigration, whatever, but like having a notion of directional truth surrounded by some mistruths or denying some central truth. Mm-hmm. Different versions of a phenomena, both of which I think erode good faith.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think all of the above. I think you know that I think this, but I think Biden, having said that he would be a one-term president and would hand it off to a younger generation, and then he didn't.
Right.
I mean, that's an example of really a big lie.
Yeah.
Maybe not as big as some of the other big ones that we talk about, but it's one that I think erodes trust, and for good reason.
And to be clear, I don't think you and I disagree that it's okay for a leader to change his or her mind. And just say so and explain your reasoning. And that there's an opportunity to build trust right there. I changed my mind. I'm going to run again, and here's why.
I think oftentimes politicians are a little bit afraid of what the media will do with that, the old waffling kind of commentary.
I was for it before I was against it, the John Kerry thing.
But really, I think thoughtful politicians, thoughtful leaders really is a better word, will change. To stay rigid and adhere to one belief despite the fact that negative evidence is rolling in, that's not good leadership.
I mean, why do you think that is? We respect and admire that in our interpersonal relationships, right? And even probably within our organizations, if our boss does something like that, displays that level of humanity and vulnerability, it probably helps us trust that person and want to stay in our jobs. What is the difference at the level of a professional politician?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I don't know. I'm not a political scientist.
Sure, yeah.
But one thing that comes to mind to me is that I think most politicians are pretty coached. They're coached by a lot of external people who think they know how to get elected. And I think that there's some validity to the coaching, that people do not want to see a wishy-washy, weak person take office, and that the media will jump in and magnify the wishy-washy weaknesses of the different politicians. And so then I think they feel like they just can't really show any cracks or any weaknesses, or they will be exposed to this onslaught of criticism.
And in there, you said something important. You said to get elected.
Yeah.
Which is different than to govern effectively, right? Those are two different jobs.
Totally.
Yeah. And a lot of times I don't think we think of them as different jobs.
And, one of the things that would be nice is that if leaders, elected leaders, could feel secure enough in themselves and in their position to be able to be honest and admit faults or admit weaknesses and problems. And I think that actually would build trust, again, if the media and the other side didn't go after it like it's red meat.
Yeah. So we started at the individual. We zoomed out to politics and the national political scene. Let's bring it back to the individual for a few minutes here. Let's talk about lying. I've gotten to a position where I think that telling the truth is always the best choice.
Mm-hmm.
Are there holes in that theory? It feels absolute, but it seems like the theory I'm sticking with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is always difficult to say the always or never perspective. I think it's important to think about what are the motivations underlying the deception or the lie.
Okay.
And there are a lot of different motivations. And if the motivation is for you to protect yourself, or for you to look better, or for you to have more control, or for you to have more power, or more attention, I'd say those are all absolutely destructive reasons to lie.
Anything self-oriented?
Yeah. And yet, if you were to lie to protect your daughter from something, I might think that is acceptable, because I think it is more acceptable for us to dissemble or distract or shift things and lie by omission or just lie if it's in the service of a genuine belief that it's important for the protection of someone else.
So you're making a narrow case for lying.
Very narrow.
Where does Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy, those sorts of things fit in?
I could go on and on about how our culture tends to, I think, in a very affable way, expect us to mislead children about where the Christmas presents came from or the Easter eggs. I never really did understand, how did the rabbit deliver the eggs and the Tooth Fairy? I mean, and so there are some, I guess you'd call them social norms, some global, certainly some national, some specifically cultural, about ways in which we deceive our children because we want to tell them a nice story or help them to feel good and to have a sense of mystery and hope.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation with John Sommers-Flanagan next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Keely Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music, and Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.